this Q&A session facilitated by Dr. Albers.
Thank you, Professor Merton, for that engaging and very interesting presentation. And it certainly generated a large number of questions and comments throughout the chat. And we're going to start with actually one of the questions that you posed at the end of your seminar that was raised in our chat area, and that is, the BBC reported that by the end of this year, over half of the global population will be connected. How do we best address these digital inequalities across the globe?
It's a great question, and it feels more than I can attempt to answer in this one. I mean, I'm acutely aware of these, and when you look around in this field, reading press reports, it's very easy for us to talk about the global, and some of my work has addressed this, but let's not forget that there are areas of the world in which access is very much restricted. What you say in some jurisdictions is heavily censored. What you access in some jurisdictions is extremely limited. How we address it is a really difficult question. But I do believe that we have an opportunity for, if you like, reaching out, communicating with people in different places. And sometimes I fear that our discussions are rather limited. Very much in this field, we tend to talk within the English, Anglo-dominant communities of North America, England, Australia, New Zealand, and so forth. And I think there's a lot to be done. I know colleagues in this country, and I know some of the work headed up by Glinda Hull has done a great job in connecting communities across the globe. And I'd like to see more of that happening. Whether that addresses inequities or not, it certainly raises awareness. And I think that's perhaps the best we can do, at least for now.
Thank you very much for that response. We have another question from one of our audience members who says, if literacies have always been mobile, then what do new technologies really add?
It's another great question, and it's a question that I'm always asking myself. In some ways, I suppose at one level, one has to say that literacies, in a way, don't change that fast. In a way, they've always been used to connect people. That's their history. It's just that they've got more sophisticated, and they've got more sophisticated more quickly. So I'll use an example from my good friend and colleague at Lancaster, Julia Gillen. Please do read her work on postcards. So she's been studying Victorian Edwardian postcards at the turn of the last century. And some really interesting things come across from that. One is that the postcard was the social networking of the day. The other thing is that people at the time believed that their communication was, actually use the word, instantaneous, because it was then possible to send a postcard when you were at work and for the postcard to arrive home before you did. Such was the sophistication of the postal service. So in some ways, we've always used literacies in the same ways to connect across time and space. But I think what I see happening, and that's why I was drawing attention to this, to some of the affordances of this virtual environment that we're in at the moment, in some ways, that's all become speeded up. So we've got that same time-space compression, but it's now a hell of a lot more sophisticated. So it's almost as if we're doing the same things, but we're now able to do them in a much more sophisticated way. So things are changing, maybe they're not changing quite so fundamentally as we sometimes think. I hope that's a good answer to the question, but I think the question is one really that I'd like to throw back in a sense to the questioner. Let's keep on asking that question. What's changing? How's it changing? What's different? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Merchant. One of our audience members asks, our pre-service Bachelor of Education program is a bring-your-own-device classroom, and they often collaborate on best practices in the classroom with digital technologies. Often their questions are about the disconnect between what we are learning in their program and what is available and used in the classroom. Do you have any further suggestions for rethinking school spaces with mobile literacies?
First of all, let me just say how envious I think some of my colleagues would be hearing about the program you describe. For here in England, our teacher preparation programs are so constrained that very often our student teachers wouldn't get much further than how to deliver the latest phonics program and maybe a couple of one-hour lectures on what digital literacy might afford. So these trainee teachers are in a very privileged position, I think. But I have thought for some time, really the bulk of my empirical work and thinking has been about schools, school children and technology. But I also do work in a university, and universities, not always, but universities have got some very sophisticated technologies up and running. Certainly in my institution, use of mobiles is in a sense so normal. And I know from when I've been elsewhere in the States and in other places as well, it's just kind of like normal to see devices being used as you talk and interact with people. Schools are far behind that, or most schools are far behind that, and that is actually a resource issue as well as everything else. So it's a very difficult question to answer because many school systems are highly constrained in what they're allowed to do through curriculum accountability measures, but also what's possible to do because of the devices that they can afford to resource. There are some wonderful exceptions. I'd like to point to the Future Schools project in Singapore, where we've got one-to-one computing with tablets which are provided by the school, and they cross the homeschool boundary in the opposite direction to the one that we normally think about. So that, for me, would be an ideal model, but it's an expensive model. So I think we've got to start forging new partnerships, and they may have to be partnerships with industry, with the manufacturers of devices, so that we can get the kind of resources into schools that both the students themselves would want, perhaps the teachers would want, I hope the teachers would want, and of course future employers would want. I think we're going to solve this one, and we've got to solve it quite quickly because technology is, of course, rapidly developing. And the scenario I encounter very often when I speak with teachers is that they're forced to use devices that are out of date with old software and a whole host of problems, which actually end up being a disincentive. So I'm sorry if there aren't very many rays of hope there, but I think we've got to keep on pushing against this. And I think there are actually some systemic issues here that if our governments, our educational authorities are really keen to provide a 21st century experience for students, an up-to-date experience, there's got to be some resourcing of classrooms. One set of one class set, 25, 30 iPads or iPods is not going to solve issues in a large school, particularly as those machines, get old, get lost, and their batteries give out.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Merchant. I think we have time for one more question. And this has been a question that's been cutting across the chat today, and that is, so many educators are concerned about aspects of current literacies that are being missed out. For example, when people chat or when they iMessage, the spelling and the grammar and how mobile communication has shifted how and what young children, adolescents communicate. And some educators are concerned about the fact that children are developing different kinds of literacies that might not be as traditional as one might expect. How do we shift the mindset of those in power to make decisions about education, access, and the possibilities of mobile communications that somehow address these quote-unquote missed out literacies? If that makes sense.
It makes complete sense, and I think it is the burning question. So in building here from where I'm based in Sheffield, the idea of a charter for 21st century literacies, which really is the centerpiece of the most recent book that you very kindly publicised at the beginning, New Literacies Across the Globe. We've been trying to work on exactly that. So again, that article up and coming, the Journal of Adult and Adolescent Literacies, the Challenge of 21st Century Literacies, is just an attempt to really push this debate centre stage. If we really do want something that equips children and students for their day-to-day living in 21st century, and of course for their future prospects, then something's got to shift pretty quickly. Of course, there are those basic literacy skills. They're still really important. But as I think some of my examples showed, even they're beginning to look a bit different as they become mobile. But very few school systems seem able to really deliver what is current, the sort of practices that most of us actually engage in quite fluently. So there really has to be a real concerted attempt by all of us to begin to press on policymakers and to press on perhaps what is perhaps a simplified version of some of the discussions that we've been having today. And that really was the idea that Kathy Burnett and I came up with, of the idea of a charter for 21st century literacies. It isn't perfect, but how can we develop something on a sheet of A4, to be very traditional about things, on a sheet of paper that you could push into people's hands and say, hey, look, literacy's got to look a bit more like this. I think it's an uphill struggle. That's how it seems at the moment, but I think it's a cause worth rallying around and worth fighting for. Thank you.